Right, good day grade 10s. I now want to go into the second lesson of the general journal. Up to now, in the first lesson, I just focused on the general ledger, and you probably were a little bit confused as to why I was taking you back to almost grade 9 work when we were looking at general ledgers. Right, the reason for it is that the general journal is that journal that we use in which we state what account do we debit and what account do we credit. So our double entries are extremely important in this. If a transaction does not fit into any other journal, then we put it into the general journal. So there's a whole mixture of entries that come in here. And so if we look at the drawn up there, it's got the same heading, it's just called the general journal, so it's the same as like all your other journals. There's still the document, the day, the details, and the folios, the same as the other journals. But this is where the difference comes now. We don't have those range of columns. We have what accounts am I going to debit and what accounts am I going to credit. And then we bring in a debtor's control and a creditor's control, which I'll show you what we do. So you've got to know which account you're debiting and which account you're crediting. And if you don't know that, that's where the ledger will come in to help you. So let's go back and look at the first account that we did. And the first one we wrote off was a bad debt. And we said that J. Smith was a debtor. He had a debit balance. So I was going to write off his account. I'm going to minus it out of his account. I'm going to credit him. And because I'm crediting J. Smith, I have to do the same to the debtor's control. That's a principle you learned when you did the debtor's journal. The debtor's control is the double entry, but you do need to know which debtor you're writing off. And while you're crediting the debtor because you're writing it off, you're minusing out of his account, the double entry was into bad debts account. So into your account then, you will debit bad debts with a journal voucher 1 or whatever number they give you. And because bad debts was debited, it has to come first. We always put the debit entry first. So debit bad debts with 100. The credit went to J. Smith's account. We need to know which debtor it was concerning. So we went to J. Smith and we credited J. Smith's account. But remember, there were 3 entries. Remember I showed you, what you did to J. Smith, you did exactly the same to the debtor's control. And we did the same thing here. Because I've credited J. Smith, I will therefore credit the debtor's control. The debtor's control and the bad debts are really the double entry of this exercise. But we need to know also who the debtor is. And then the third thing is we bring in a narration to say, well, what are we doing? And as briefly as you possibly can, but making sense of what you've done. For example, a bad debt written off. Then the second of the entries we did was we added on to J. Brown interest. We charged him interest. So we said J. Brown being a debtor, we're adding on, so we debited J. Brown, and therefore we debited the debtor's control. So there's the debit. What did we credit? We credited an interest income account because this is an income account. And so in your general journal, you always put the debit first. So this time J. Brown will come first. J. Brown, and you've debited him with 50. Because he's a debtor and you debited him, you do exactly the same to the debtor's control. And then you credited interest income with the 50 Rand. Interest income is neither a debtor nor a creditor, so that amount is not extended. It's only when you write down a debtor. In this case we had 2 debtors, so that's why the entries have gone into the debtor's control. And that is interest charged and overdue account. It's again as short a narration as you possibly can. Right. The third of the entries was when we had the dishonored check and we cancelled the discount. Now remember, we had already done, I said before, I had already done the receiving of the check and giving the discount. We now have to cancel the check, which we do in your cash payments journal. So if you were doing an exercise with all your journals, you would still go to the cash payments journal to do that one. And then the general journal, because it doesn't fit in anywhere else, is the cancelling of the discount. So you added it back onto Jones's account because he owes you that 50, and you therefore added it on to the debtors control, and double entry, we minused it out of the discount allowed to cancel that discount because we're not giving it. So can you now do that entry on your own in the general journal? Now again, always your debit first. So you debited Jones because you're adding back on, he owes you that 50 Rand. And because you've debited a debtor, you're debiting the debtors control. And you cancelled the expense account, the discount allowed, because you're not allowing it, and you credit it with 50. And then your narration, discount cancelled on an RD check. Right, did you manage that on your own? Good, and well done. Then the fourth of the entries was to do with the drawings. And we said that if the owner had taken money for his own use, you would put that into your cash payments journal, and that would be exactly the same as you've always done. But if the owner is taking trading stock, then it can't go into the cash payments journal because he's taking stock, not money. And so we had an entry for the 800 Rand. Now I'd like you to do that entry and then to carry on and do the correction of the error with the packing material for me. Alright, so the drawings one, drawings from your Daxel or your acronym that you use back in grade 9 when you learned the double entry, drawings account is always debited. So you debited the drawings with the 800 Rand, which is exactly what we did in the ledger, and we credited the trading stock. You are minusing away from your asset. You are minusing away the 800 Rand. Now, neither of these are debtors or creditors. There's no names here. So therefore, these do not get extended. Only if there's a debtor or a creditor's name will you use the debtors or creditors control. And it's goods taken for personal use or goods taken for own use or owner took goods, something to do with that effect. And then the error that we had to correct, we had actually bought packing materials. So packing materials being an expense, we debited the 400 Rand. Remember, if you look back here, the 400 Rand we added on to packing materials because that's what we did buy, and we minused it out of the trading stock because that was the error. And so we do exactly the same here. We debited the packing materials, we minused out of the asset account the trading stock because it was not trading stock we were buying. And again, neither of these are debtors or creditors, and so nothing gets extended, and it's quite acceptable just to write correction of error, or you can explain that in more detail. Now in these entries up that we've just done now in the general journal, we focused on the ledger accounts first, and we worked out the debits and credits. Now that's not going to generally happen. You're going to be asked to do up general journal entries on your own. And so you've got to work out the debits and credits. If you can't do it in your head, then just do rough T accounts. And let me explain what I mean. Let's say we get an extra entry, a creditor D Dawn, who we owed 1,000 Rand to, charged us interest of 75 on our overdue account. Now if you can work out what to debit and credit, great, go straight to your journal and put it in. If you can't, you're going to have to say, all right, now let me just work that out. Just do rough accounts, and I literally mean rough. Don't waste time. We know that we've got a creditor here, D Dawn. We know that there's a balance of account in his account. But now, the entry that we've got to record is that he's charging me interest. Now you've got to ask yourself, right, I owe this person 1,000. He's charging me interest. Do I owe him more or less? And obviously I owe him more, so I'll have to credit the creditor. I'm adding on to the liability. I owe him more. And the double entry is, this is interest I'm being charged. This is an expense to me. So that's where the debit is. You're debiting the interest. And so into your general journal, you will debit interest. Now some of you might have worked out straight away that interest is an expense, so I know I've got to debit it. And therefore I'll have to credit D Dawn. Alright, with interest charged. But now D Dawn in this stage is a creditor, and you've credited the account, so we will credit in the creditor's control. So use ledger accounts, especially when you first start off, to work out in your mind which is the debit and which is the credit. And then to finish this off, we do not add up the debit and credit because this total doesn't go anywhere. We do add up the debtors and creditors because just like before in the cash receipts and cash payments and those journals, where we have totals, we can post just the total to the debtors and creditors control. We don't have to, for example, write bad debts and interest over here. No, sorry, it was interest and discount cancelled, these 250 rands. We don't have to cancel that. We could just put 100 rand in and say sundry accounts. All right. Now there are a lot of general journal entries in your book and you need to practice them. Those of you sitting with the New Era book, if you go from 6.4, there's a lot of entries. They will take you step by step through all of these entries and they will progressively get more difficult, but you need to get yourself focused on from 6.6. And they start off by, first of all, identifying which journal would it go into, and then once you're quite sure that you know which of the general journal entries, you will then go in to drawing up general journal entries. Not the ledger, so if you need to do ledger, just do them in rough. Now, it's an extremely important section, and it's a section that grade 10s often battle with. If you take your time, concentrate, think back to your debits and credits, you should get this thing mastered. Good luck.